Everyone, and welcome to tonight's Licensing and Safety Committee meeting. I am Councillor John Porter, the Chairman of the committee. The meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube, so members of the public are able to follow proceedings. Before we start the meeting, I would like to explain, for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching, that today's meeting is being held both over Zoom and Teams, and with councillors present in the Times Square chamber, and also members are remote. Only members who are physically present in the meeting will be able to vote on any items. Members joining via the Zoom or Teams can participate in the debate but not able to vote. Can we have apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillors Sandra Ingham, Nigel Atkinson and Councillor Gareth Barnard. I also understand that Councillors Badebo, Mackenzie Boyle and Bidwell are joining us remotely. Could I please ask them in order to confirm that they are in attendance?
Councillor Michael Badebo present.
Councillor Paul Bidwell present, and also can I forward apologies for Councillor Trish Brown, please?
Councillor Tina Mackenzie Boyle present remotely.
Thank you for those apologies, Councillor Bidwell, for Councillor Tricia Brown. Do any other members bring any other apologies, please? Okay. Item 2 on the agenda is the Declaration of Interest. It's laid out on the agenda. I'm not going to read it. We all know it. So if any members have any declarations, please declare it either now or during the course of the meeting. Item 3 is to move the minutes of the meeting of the Licensing Committee held on the 3rd of February 2022 and the special meeting held on the 12th of May 2022 and 18th of May 2022 to be signed as a correct record. Are there any issues from those minutes? I see none, so could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Allen, thank you. Is everybody happy with the accuracy of those minutes? Yes. Okay. Thank you. I will sign those when at the end of the meeting. Item 4 is urgent items of business.
Chairman, I can confirm that nothing has been added or raised with the clerk in advance of the meeting.
Thank you. Item 5 is notice for public speaking.
Again, Chairman, we've not been advised of any applications to speak or any public questions at this meeting.
Thank you. I'm going to slightly vary the order of the agenda, and I'm going to pull forward item 8 because we have James Button present with us. So this is the item 8 is about the draft Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle policy. And on your agenda, it's pages 35 to 122. So hopefully you've all read it, digested it, and over to you, James. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to this meeting. I'm James Button. I'm a solicitor by profession, and I, amongst other things, specialise in taxi licensing law. I was asked by the council to review and revise the Hackney carriage and private hire policy. The Department for Transport issued some guidance in July 2020, which made it clear that all authorities should have a comprehensive taxi policy, and those authorities that already had a policy should review that to ensure that it complied with the Department for Transport's guidelines. So that's what you have in front of you, ladies and gentlemen, a draft policy. The idea is that that will be able to be used for the consultation, which will be, as I understand it, a 12-week consultation in accordance with the government's guidelines. So I'd just like to explain a little bit about the aim behind it. The idea is to provide a clear basis for your taxi licensing activity. The decisions to grant licenses, the decisions to take action against licenses, and indeed the specifications of the vehicles that are required. That will inform yourselves as the council. It will inform the trade, those who are already licensed in the trade, those who may want to join the trade, what they expect, what is expected of them and what they will have to do. And of course, it also informs your citizens. Now, in drawing this up, I have taken account of not only the guidelines, I've taken account of the legislation and also best practice in other authorities around the country. The way it's drafted is to provide a clear split between the policy, the requirements, and then the conditions which will attach to the various licenses. It's broken down, I think, into a logical format. There is the general introduction that explains the purpose. Then you go on to the dual driver licenses. Your authority grants licenses that cover both a hackney carriage driver and a private hire driver in what's called a dual license. There is one exception to that, and that is to allow people who are only going to drive a private hire vehicle to undertake school contracts issued by a local education authority to have a restricted license. They would not have to sit the knowledge test that the other drivers have to, because they would only be travelling on a set route every day, twice a day, to and from the child's home to the school and back. And that will hopefully then encourage people into that particular field, because recruiting in that field is quite difficult. That license would then be issued with a condition on it, making it clear that it can only be used when a journey is being undertaken under a local education authority contract. Moving on to the next section, that is on the vehicles in the policy, the hackney carriage and private hire policy. And then finally in policy, we have the policy relating to private hire operators. Then we move to the 6 appendices. Appendix 1 is the previous convictions policy, which is based on the previous convictions policy that your council adopted in October 2019. So there is very little difference there. Appendix 2 is the penalty point scheme, which enables the authority to take a less aggressive approach to non-compliance with license transgressions. The legislation allows the authority to suspend a license, revoke a license, or refuse to renew it. Those are obviously draconian actions. So the idea of a penalty point scheme is a graduated response to non-compliance, which will ultimately lead to the authority deciding whether they should revoke, refuse to renew, or suspend the license. Appendix 3 is a code of conduct for drivers. Just to explain this, the legislation is slightly peculiar in as much as conditions can be attached to a private hire driver's license, but they can't be attached to a hackney carriage driver's license. That means that the only way in the legislation to control hackney carriage drivers is via the legislation itself and the bylaws. Now, that is fairly unwieldy, and to overcome the absence of conditions on a hackney carriage driver's license and to reflect the fact that you are issuing dual licenses, rather than have conditions on the license which will only take effect when the person is driving a private hire vehicle, it is more satisfactory to have a code of conduct. This has a number of advantages. It applies to both hackney carriage and private hire activity, and it is your council's expectation of behaviour. And then if a licensee falls short of that, it invites the question as to whether they remain a fit and proper person to hold the licence. Then we move on to Appendices 4, 5 and 6. They are the hackney carriage vehicle conditions, the private hire vehicle conditions, and the private hire operators conditions. That's a very brief overview of the document, ladies and gentlemen. What I would ask you to do is please overlook the formatting and the appearance. This is very much a work in progress at the moment. A great deal of time and effort has been put into it by Moira and excuse me, Julia O'Brien, and it is the content that I'm here to answer questions on. So to that extent, if there are any questions that you might have or any points that I might be able to assist you with, I'm here to assist.
Thank you, James. And I know you gave us a brief a couple of months ago, so thank you for that. Nick Allen, please, has a question.
Yeah, I know this is going out to consultation, so I'm going to want to check, for example, on page 45, where we seem to have either or paragraphs. Are we supposed to pick one before we send it out, or are we consulting on both paragraphs?
Sorry, Councillor, you have an advantage on me. The copy I have doesn't have page numbers on it.
It's in the, in 1.7, shortly before 1.8, I've got if the renewed licence has not been granted, etc.
Ah, yes.
And we've got an either or there.
Yes.
Are we consulting on both?
I would suggest that you as an authority need to decide which one you prefer and consult on that one.
Okay.
But it's a matter for you to determine, Councillor.
Okay, because there's another bit further down where you've got 3 years and 6 years, and there's a couple of bits where I guess the idea is we make a decision this evening. Okay, thank you.
James, good evening to you, Michael Brossard. I sent an email to Moy. I read through the original document and I realised that the page that I'm quoting won't be of any help to you because it's actually the page on the original document. But in fact, it's a question really that I could put to you, that I put to Moira. There is reference in the document to insurance. Should we actually define and specify comprehensive insurance rather than third party? Would that be a reasonable requirement?
It is, and as far as I'm aware, that has been put into the document that's in your pack.
In that case, then, it seems that it's been picked up then. Thank you for that. Thank you, James.
Yes.
Moira, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, James.
Good evening.
I wanted to just ask a couple of questions, well, really, to do with the content of the conditions. It's a far more comprehensive list than we've had before, but some of them seem to me to rely on subjective judgment for the points awarded. For example, failing to offer reasonable assistance with luggage, or driver not clean and respectable in their dress. I mean, that's sort of fairly subjective stuff. Could we ever realistically award points for that?
I think the answer to that is yes. If you receive a complaint or your officers encounter a driver who is, for example, extremely scruffily dressed, then that evidence can be taken into account. The officer could impose the penalty points. The licensee then has a right of appeal against that, which the suggestion I would make is that that comes to yourselves at the subcommittee. And at that point, you can decide whether to uphold the appeal, dismiss the appeal, or indeed vary the number of points that have been awarded. So I think, yes, they are subjective, but without that, you end up with a very rigid enforcement tool, and the whole purpose of the penalty point scheme is to remove that rigidity, to make it much fairer for the licensee. The first transgression is not going to lead to action against the license. It's going to be 3 or 4 down the line, depending on the matters in hand. And it gives that licensee an opportunity to accord with what you as the council say should be their standards of behaviour. If ultimately they don't do that, then you have the possibility to take action against their licence again. And if you do take that action, that final action, there is of course the right of appeal to the Magistrates' Court and then further on to the Crown Court.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member have any questions, please, for James? Paul Bidwell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is going to help too much because, again, I've made comments against the page numbers, but there was one particular paragraph, second paragraph on page 42, where you quote the figures for degree education within the borough, and we know that those figures are pre-2019. So can I ask that they're updated to current figures rather than using outdated figures? And the second point is that, again, sadly, I've only got page number to give you, but it's point 18.26, which refers to a bylaw, but it doesn't actually say what bylaw that is. It's not completed. So could we address those as well, please?
Certainly. If I could ask you to pass those comments on to Julia and Moira. I don't have access to the figures on education in your area, I'm afraid, but certainly I can look at that required that issue over that paragraph where there appear to be some words missing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Michael Balibo, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Michael Bradable here. I really like the point system. Does the point system apply to operators as well as drivers?
The answer to that is yes, it can do. As it's drafted, I'm just checking. I think it does apply to operators. Yes, it does. Part 4, breach of operator conditions.
Okay, thank you. Also, I recall we used to have an age limit on cars. Has that been removed?
There is a suggestion, I think, if I remember rightly, that there should be, that you should consider having, there is an age limit, yes. It's in the vehicle section. I'm to say, I'm sorry, I don't have any page numbers here. All vehicles must meet Euro 5 or Euro 6 emissions standards if they're going to be submitted for the grant or renewal of a license. Emission standards are generally accepted to be a better approach than age. The age of the vehicle is not a particularly good indicator as to its condition, but the emissions are important, as we all know. So that's the approach. And then there is also a suggestion that there is testing based on either age or mileage.
Can I then go back to, I think, the question I asked many years ago when I saw the age restriction? Does this now exclude, I know I read somewhere there might be special treatment for classic cars that don't meet the Euro 5 and 6. Is that still the case?
Well, it will be, Councillor, because this is a policy. So if somebody comes along with a 1912 Silver Ghost that they want to have licensed as a private hire vehicle, then you would sit and determine whether or not, on the merits of that application, there is a justification to depart from the policy. If you decide that there is, then that's fine. But conversely, if somebody just turns up with a 15-year-old clapped Lada that they want to have as a private hire vehicle, you may decide not to depart from your policy.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, I mean, for consistency, transparency, so everybody understands, shouldn't we have something in place written to stop those kind of things happening, or at least to give people an heads up on the type of vehicle we are going to even consider?
Well, I would suggest you have given that heads up by making it clear that they need to be Euro 5 or Euro 6. There is then a section and it's numbered 1.29, but I know the numbering is a little peculiar. The council will consider applications for private hire vehicle licenses for novelty vehicles. These are vehicles other than regular saloon, estate, people carrier or sport utility vehicles, and may include vintage or classic cars, fire engines, military vehicles, but this is not an exhaustive list. So there is that part in the policy that makes it clear that people can make an application in those terms should they wish.
You are correct. Thank you for outlining that. Yeah, that kind of covers everything that I wanted to say. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Michael. It's page 62, Michael, about novelty vehicles. One sec. Paul, is that an old hand?
Or supplementary. Maybe we'll take Ian.
Yes, it is. Sorry, Chair.
No problems. Ian Kirk, please.
Apologies, everyone. I'm normally got a warm-up act. Thank you, Chair. James, thank you. By their very nature, these pieces of legislation are hardly bedtime reading. And I wondered, from your professional opinion, is there the ability that we can add a very small section, such as a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs, on how all stakeholders read this legislation? The point that Councillor Gore raised earlier on, I think, was really important, because you will know as a trained lawyer that we've got the reasonable person test. And I think that very often all stakeholders look at it and get frightened because they don't understand how to read it. And I wondered, from your point of view, could we stick something in there just to give all stakeholders the opportunity that when they read that legislation, they know how it's interpreted? Thank you.
I could try to, and I don't want to sound obstructive here, but in drawing this up, I have done my best to write it in plain English. So I would hope that it will be clear to anybody who does read it. And the other thing is that the High Court has made it clear that local authority policies are not to be read as if they were legislation. The very strict interpretation to the meaning of the words that is applied by the senior courts when determining what legislation means should not be applied to local authority policies. The court will say, right, what was the aim of this? Is that aim clear? And has that decision succeeded in fulfilling that aim, or has it missed completely? So I appreciate what you mean, sir. And as I say, I will happily try and draft something up to that effect. But I think it perhaps might be better to say what I've just said, that this is not legislation. This is not to be interpreted in the same way. This is guidance. This is the council's guidance as to how they will approach taxi licensing. And it should be taken by everybody in that light. Plus, of course, the fact that you always consider each and every case on its own merits, but in the light of this policy, this guidance. So there will be occasions where it will be okay and the right thing to do to depart from this and make a decision which apparently flies in the face of this. Now, as long as that's happening occasionally, that's fine. If you discover when you analyse your decision making over the course of a year or whatever, that you are departing from your policy regularly, then clearly the policy needs to be amended to reflect your thinking. Does that help? And please come back to me on that.
I think that narrative alone, James, is very useful in terms of the emphasis on guidance rather than the legislation. So very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any other member have a question, please, before we decide on? So if we can all go to page 45, please.
Sorry, pass it on read. We need to agree which ones we're going to.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what we're just doing. And we need to decide whether we are going to go for the first paragraph, the or, which is highlighted in red. So I'll give members a chance to quickly read it.
Would you like me to explain the difference between those, Chair?
Yes, please, James.
One of the peculiarities with taxi legislation is that whilst there is an expectation that licenses can be renewed, there's no mechanism for doing so. So you need to have a system built within your policy. Now, there are really two possibles, and those are the ones that I've offered here. If the license is not, the renewed license has not been issued before the current one expires, and this will be driver and operator licenses really, because the vehicle license will need a test anyway, then that is the end of it until the renewed license is granted. And that license has come to an end. The new one has not been issued, and that licensee can therefore not work as a driver or an operator in that interim period. Pardon me. The alternative approach is that in those circumstances, the authority would issue a short-term license without prejudice to any subsequent decision that may be made when the application is fully and properly considered, to enable that licensee to continue working. Now, there isn't a right or a wrong answer to that. It's a question of approach. Some authorities take the view that this is the individual's livelihood, and they ought to make sure that they take the steps required to apply in good time to enable that renewal to be granted before the current license expires. Other authorities take a more perhaps helpful approach is the right word, and recognise that some of these licensees do have a tendency to leave things till the last minute, sometimes even possibly the last second before they apply, and that the authority should do its best to help them in those circumstances. It's a matter for you to decide which approach you want to take. I can say that across England and Wales, where this legislation applies, there are a great many authorities that use either of those systems. So if you, whichever way you go, you won't be out of step with a significant number of other taxi licensing authorities.
Thank you, James. Nick Allen, please.
I guess on the second one, it depends. I mean, the question would be, how long does it normally take for the PPP to turn around a licence application? Because if it comes in on the last day that their licence is valid, then would it take up to a month to turn around for a new one, or is it? Do we normally turn around in 3 days? It would be a question of knowing how long that normally takes. And the other thing I'd like to know is, are we going to make sure that the renewed licence is backdated to the date of expiry of the old licence, not to the end of the expiry of the short-term extension?
If I may, in relation to the second question, I would say yes, that would be the case. But I can't answer the first one. I'm afraid that would have to be one of your officers.
I'm going to ask Judy if she can come in on that one, please.
Thank you, Chair. Our normal turnaround time is 5 days. We are asking for submissions of renewal applications to be now 30 days in advance. But yeah, the normal turnaround will be 5 days, although we hope to do it in far less than that.
Okay. Yeah. Nick, supplementary?
Yes, sort of. I mean, my suggestion therefore would be, if they're going to a sort of 30-day policy of 30 days in advance, given that they tend to do it on the last day, then giving them a month would probably be the right thing to do.
Moira, please.
Yes, just a sort of practical question attached to Nick's question. If there's a month allowed, would then any offences occurring in that month be enforceable? Because theoretically the driver doesn't actually have a licence, that they have one that's been sort of temporarily allowed.
Well, Councillor, they do have a licence. That's the whole point. You grant a short-term licence. Yeah. So there's no doubt that they are licensed. So they will be insured, driving the vehicle will be lawful. And yes, any transgressions during that time will have just the same consequences as any transgressions at any other time.
Thank you. I thought I'd just check that out.
Thank you, Moira. Michael Ballybow, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll definitely support the red, the text in red, and I think also it's made clear that there's a clause there that says may be granted. It's not will be granted, may be granted, and I think that is nicely worded. I think also we need to take into account obviously the livelihood of the drivers. Anything can happen. I know they have 30 days before it expires, but we're humans. You know, some people forget, some people just, you know, things happen in people's lives. Just giving them that leeway might help to support them and their family. A question for the paragraph in question is that just one time temp, or can that be extended? Because it doesn't say that.
It doesn't. It would depend, I would suggest, entirely on the circumstances. What are the reasons why that license hasn't been granted properly within the timescale of that temporary license? If there are good reasons for that, then you may consider issuing a further one. But again, I don't think that needs to be in the policy. That can be a departure from policy on in a particular set of circumstances.
Would that be your advice then, to just, you know, don't put it in, but at least give the officers the leeway if they wanted to?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members have a question? Nick.
Sorry, just a comment going back to Michael's comment about the may be granted. Presumably, if there was a circumstance where we were definitely not going to renew a license, we wouldn't bother giving them an extra month.
Yeah, I agree on that, Nick. Okay, my proposal then is that we go for given the extended 30 days. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Ian. Those in favour, please show. Those against? It's carried, I'm afraid. And then we'll go to page 50, please. Just gone past it.
Sorry, Chair. What subject are we talking about?
This is where we're going to decide on the 3 or 6 years.
For the
paragraph 1.8, end of. Safeguarding child sexual abuse and exploitation and country lines training.
Right.
Yeah. So we need to decide whether or not we want to have the refresher training every 3 years or every 6 years. My personal opinion is every 3 years, because there is so much changing going on, and I think it's advisable that it should be every 3 years. But I will throw it open to members. Michael Ballybow, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would like to support you on that. I think, you know, things change so quickly nowadays. 3 years is a long time in safeguarding and all that. So I am 100% behind you on the 3-year thing for both, actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Tina, please.
Chairman, likewise, I support what Michael Ballybow says, and I support your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. So the proposal is then that we have the refresher every 3 years. Thank you, Nick. Those in favour, please show. And that one is unanimous. Thank you. Let me just go back to my script. Does any other member have any questions for James? Julia? Tina, is that an old hand?
Yes, it is. It's all a bit slow happening at the moment. Sorry.
Not a problem. Julia, do you have anything to add, please?
Not particularly, Chair, but thank you very much. Only to say that obviously before we send out the consultation document, we will ensure that all the agreed changes have been made to it.
Okay, so that would include 1.1, right at the start with the population and everything else.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendations are that the committee agrees that the officers should consult on the draft Hackney carriage and private hire licensing policy set out in Annex A, subject to any changes made at this meeting. And the second one is recommends that on conclusion of consultation and consideration of responses, the matter return to further consideration to the meeting on the 20th of October 2022, and that the committee, prior to recommendation being made to full council around the adoption of the policy. Thank you. Those in favour, please show. Thank you. That is carried unanimously. James, many thanks for your time tonight. It's a pleasure again, as normal. Thank you for your valuable information and insight. And have a
Thank you
lovely
very
evening.
much for inviting me, and I'm delighted to have been of assistance.
Thank you very much indeed.
Good night, ladies and gentlemen.
Good night.
Good night, James.
Good night and thank you.
So we now revert back to item 6, which is the annual report. So, Moira, if you'd like to introduce the report, please.
Good evening, members. As was agreed last year, we've managed to bring the annual report to the June meeting this year. The report sets out the activities of the Licensing Committee itself, as well as the work undertaken by the Licensing Service. Despite, or perhaps because of COVID, 2021-22 was another very busy year for the members of this committee, as well as the licensing team. The committee oversaw the consultation and subsequent adoption of the Statement of Gambling Principles, which was published ahead of the 31st of January 2022 deadline, we're pleased to note. The committee also reviewed and consulted on a revised set of Hackney carriage tariffs. We did that last year, we're doing it again this year. They agreed on some minor amendments to the scheme of delegation in respect of the Licensing Act. They received an update on the work of the Environmental Health and Trading Standards Services, and they also reviewed and amended the taxi guidance notes. In addition, the chairman also agreed outside of the meeting process an extension to the 6 monthly taxi vehicle inspections because of the COVID crisis. The licensing panel itself was not required to meet last year. Members have attended some joint training with the other partner organisations when working and was still a member of the Public Protection Partnership on both the Licensing and Gambling Acts, which we hope you found to be very useful. The taxi trade meetings continue to go from strength to strength, and we met 4 times this year to discuss issues of mutual concern. I hope that these meetings are helping to strengthen the good working relationship we have with the trade. The number of attendees at these meetings has continued to increase, so I think that demonstrates that the trade are finding them useful too. The report also sets out some detail about the effect that COVID has had on the trade and licensing numbers. We're continuing to work on our communication and engagement with our residents, and over the summer you will see officers from the PPP at a number of events supporting the Water Safety Partnership. We're using these opportunities to promote other areas of the service too, so do come along and say hello to us when you see our marquee at these events. If anyone wants any information about those, please do contact me and I can provide that to you. Looking ahead, the recruitment and retention of staff will be the priority for the first quarter of this year, or the first half of this year, as well as the implementation and embedding of the new IT system. The report also highlights some of the legislative changes which will affect the service as we go through this year. If members have any questions, Julia and I will be happy to try and answer them for you.
Thank you for that, Moira. Does any member have any questions, please? Alvin, please.
I'm sure Julia will probably be able to answer this, but I suspect that that question is because there's nobody that's applied. The licenses are applied for on a 3-year basis, and it just may be that there's nobody that's applied for them in this year. They will have an existing. They've got a license, but they haven't applied. Yeah.
So I believe that members online couldn't hear the original question.
Okay.
So the question was on Appendix A, home to school operators was 0, and that was the response that was given.
And there was another item of the table. Interesting, looking at the penalty points that have been issued over the years, and they seem to have sort of gone down to 0, apart from the failure to tell the authority about a misdemeanor of some sort. Is that? I just you sort of look at that and say, is that because everybody's behaving themselves, or have we lightened up on there a bit, or is there something happening there?
Julia?
I'd like to think it's because there have been no misdemeanors. It may also be the fact that perhaps officers haven't been out as much as they otherwise would. But hopefully it's because everyone's behaving.
I think it's a combination of a bit of both, Alvin, but I'm going to err on the side of caution and say hopefully it is our taxi drivers are a lot more diligent in their inspection of their vehicle and reporting everything.
Well, that was the answer I got from the taxi driver that I on the way here when I told him about that table. He said we're all behaving ourselves.
Mystery shopper.
Perfect.
Any other questions, please?
Tina had her hand up, but it's come down. So
Tina, did you have a question?
Michael Bedibo.
No.
Okay, thank you. Michael Badibo, please.
Then me.
Thank you, Chair. On page 16, 5.4, there'll be a requirement to list taxis that can, that are wheelchair accessible. As part of that publication or list, could we list the time of day that they operate? Is that possible?
Julia? You're on mute, Julia.
Apologies, I've got the same trouble as Jim Button was having. I haven't got page numbers, but
I believe it's 5.4.
It's 5.4, Chief.
5.4 on the...
5.40.
5.40, okay. Right, so yeah, so we've got the list of licensed taxis, and this could be something that members would like us to look at in terms of having a list of vehicles that we would find appropriate to issue, and we can certainly look at that if members would like us to do that.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I would love us if we have the capacity to do that, to please go ahead and do that. Because I've had a feedback from a disabled user about difficulty in finding taxis to take her and return her home in the evenings. So she's stuck at home and not be able to enjoy going out to theaters and stuff like that, because they just could not find people to bring her back home around 10 o'clock, for example, or 11 o'clock when shows end.
Okay, so all of the Hackney carriages are wheelchair accessible vehicles. So any of those should have been able to take her back?
No, it's just they don't operate at the time. That's why. It's just the lateness. That's all.
Right, okay.
So it might be easier if she had a list or access to a list of taxis or operators that are happy to operate in the evenings.
Okay, all right, we can certainly look at that for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Michael?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. maybe, yeah, microphone's on, Julia. A couple of questions. I appreciate you haven't got page numbers. 5.36, which talks about the recruitment and retention. Given that obviously Wokingham have gone back and done their own thing, has there been have some of the staff now gone back effectively to Wokingham? And also, has Niam been replaced now that I know that she has left? That's my first question, Moira.
Okay, so we have lost several officers back to Wokingham. And in terms of recruitment and retention, we have several vacancies for licensing officers. We are just putting those job descriptions back through job evaluation in order to make them more attractive. And then we're hoping to put out those adverts in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So it's unfortunately a bit of watch this space on that, but yes, we are hoping to recruit in as soon as possible.
Thank you, Maura. Moving on, 5.44. This is one where, in fact, in Sandhurst, we've got a couple of places where there's the outside bistro type area, continental type arrangement. Are we able to justify? And I must say, previous cap was £100, and I see we're now proposing £350 for renewal and £500 for new other applications. Was an analysis done in order to determine that the £100 was insufficient in terms of the number of hours, officer hours, that would be expended in validating and approving these applications?
Chairman, I'm happy to answer that. That's something that's coming through on the regeneration bill. It's not something that's been done locally, so it'll be something that will be enforced on us rather than a choice of the level of fees that we're going to set.
Well, that's also. When you say regeneration, this is for Bracknell, then?
No, it's national legislation. There's the levelling up and regeneration bill that's currently working its way through Parliament, so that's where that's come from.
Okay. So it's legislation then. Oh, well, in that case.
And it's actually something that we don't deal with either. It's the highways team that deal with it.
Last question. On page 90, well, in fact, because you haven't got the page, Appendix A, number of licence valid at date stated. Can we check with pet shops? It's shown as 3 throughout the borough. We've actually got 2 in Sandhurst, so I wonder if, in fact, that figure maybe does need revision. It's not for now. It's maybe just tomorrow or whenever, just to verify that it is a correct figure, because it may just be that just 1 outside Sandhurst, but we've, as John knows, got 2. Fine. Thank you, Maura.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Nothing else, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? No? Okay. The report was just to be noted, so there's no need for any recommendations or voting. So items.
Chair, sorry, my hand was up a little bit late,
sorry, Michael.
but I was.
Yeah.
Sorry, my fault, Chair.
Can you please put your camera on, please? All members that are remote, when you talk, can you please put your cameras on? Thank you.
Can you see?
Yeah, we can see you, Michael.
Sorry, I don't have my background with me on my mobile, but yes, just on Appendix C, penalty points issued by year. 2021-22, failure to notify conviction, caution, FP. I don't know what FP is, but what exactly was that? Was that a conviction that was that wasn't notified, and how serious a conviction was that?
Julia?
Yep, thank you, Chair. That is a speeding conviction, so it's a traffic offence. I would have to look up exactly what it is, but it's normally a speeding one, so it may not be that serious, but it is speeding, whatever it was.
Thank you. And what does FP stand for?
Speeding penalty, I believe. I'll Google it.
F for Freddy.
Fixed penalty.
Okay, thank you.
I'm guessing. I would have to Google it, but I think it's fixed penalty.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we will move on now to item 7. which is for the outcome of the Hackney Carriage Tariffs consultation. Damien, would you like to present, please?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good evening, members. This is probably the easiest paper this evening because essentially the decision has already been made. But members will recall that we brought a report to the special meeting of this committee on the 12th of May to discuss the business case put forward by the trade to increase tariffs. And this committee was supportive of the proposals that were brought forward, and they were then agreed at the executive meeting on the 24th of May. As the consultation ran from the 1st of June to the 15th of June, it was promoted in the usual way. So we had notices placed in the Bracknell News, information on our website, and notices being put up at Times Square. All of the taxi trade were also contacted directly, and press releases were issued as well as social media posts put out. The consultation ran up until the 15th of June, but we didn't receive any objections. So the revised tariffs came into operation from the 16th of June, and officers have liaised already with the meter agents and trade, and a drop-in day to recalibrate meters took place at the Leisure Centre on Saturday, the 18th of June. So this paper tonight is just to update the committee as was promised at the special meeting on the 12th of May. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Damien. Does any member have any questions? No. And again, this was just for note. No recommendations, we don't need to vote. So that concludes tonight's meeting, and the next meeting of the Licensing and Safety Committee will take place on the 20th of October 2022. Joey, could you just advise